Hey crew, it's Ben, and I'm back with another Bible study. Today we are going to be getting back into Judges, but before we do, if you're new here, if you're unfamiliar with what's going on, I have some unconventional beliefs. It would probably be better for you if you were to start in Genesis. I would hate for you to get your feelings hurt along the way. But for those of you who have been around and you know where we're going, we were left off in Judges 16, so we are going to dive into Judges 17. And I got new glasses today, so I can actually read halfway decently. We're going to talk today about Micah's idolatry, and this is an interesting study, right? There is a lot of things that is going to happen in this one that's probably going to piss you off. So if you get offended by me saying that something's going to piss you off because this is a Bible study, this is definitely the wrong Bible study for you. Now, a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, "The 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and about which I heard you utter a curse, I have the silver here with me. I took it." There is so much going on right here that we do not have context to, but we do have an 1,100 shekels of silver reference. And it is right here. Delilah got 1,100 shekels of silver to sell out Samson. In order to sell out the judge of Israel, 1,100 shekels of silver were transferred. And then he was in prison for a while, and then he was made fun of, and then he pushed the pillars down, and there was time there. And maybe Micah is Samson's. Now that is pure speculation, right? That is just why. Where did this story come from? What is the reason for the story? And the only reference to 1,100 shekels specifically, right, is Samson and Delilah. And now the mother didn't have 1,100. It was taken from her. So maybe that I don't know. I don't know. I'm just speculating here, but that's really weird, right? It's really weird that this story just starts off with the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and about which I heard you utter a curse. I have the silver with me. I took it. Took it from where? Right? Now, maybe he took it from the destruction of the temple, where they were making fun of Samson, who somehow pushed two pillars and took down a whole building. But we won't know, right? This is one of those things we just won't know. It's something to speculate about. It's something to have fun with. And then his mother said, "Blessed be my son by the Lord, because he stole this silver." Right? I have it. I took it. And then when he had returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, "Oh, I get it. He stole it from her and brought it back." Well, somebody stole it from her and brought it back. Maybe that was a story that was supposed to be in here and it got censored along the way. I don't know. "I wholly dedicate the silver to the Lord for my son's benefit, to make a graven image and a molten idol, and therefore I will now return it to you." So she's going to give him the 1,100 shekels back, and he's going to go and make a graven image in the name of the Lord. Well, do you not know at all the rules of Israel? That's one of those specific ones, right? That is one of the ones that is written supposedly in stone. That is the one thing that you should know. There are 10 laws, right? This is one of the so you don't know, right? Okay, maybe you're ignorant. Maybe you're out in the wilderness somewheres, a shepherd who magically come across this 1,100 shekels that was stolen from your mom, and she's going to take this 1,100 shekels now. 1,100 shekels, keep this in mind, right? 1,100 shekels is 26 pounds. 26 pounds of silver. Now, silver is a heavy metal, so it's fairly weighty, right? But still, that's a lot. And in value, 26 pounds of silver would go a long way, right? You would have to already be rich in order to dedicate 26 pounds of silver to being made into a god. Like you would have to have, like, your house has got to be paid off, your cars are paid off, and you're riding on property taxes, right? Like that's the kind of situation you have to be in, and you're making bank because that's a lot of money. That is more money than most households in the area would see in probably a decade or two. Like that's a lot of money. And so he returned the silver to his mother, and she took the 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith. Now that's different, right? I wholly dedicate the silver to the Lord for my son's benefit, but then she slices out 200 instead. And I mean, that's a significant difference between 26 pounds. And gave that 200 to the silversmith who made them into a graven image and a molten idol. Now, 200 is approximately 5 pounds or 2.3 kilograms for those of you who don't know how to measure things. And so that's still a fairly significant chunk, right? That's like the about half the weight of a milk jug or a little over that. And so like that's a fairly significant chunk, about half a gallon's milk worth. Now, it's smaller than that, so it's like probably a good fist sized, maybe a little bit bigger chunk of silver that they turn into this god. And they make them into a graven image and a molten idol, and they were placed in the house of Micah. So they take this and they put it in their house. And now this man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and some household idols, and ordained one of his sons as his priest. And in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. What do y'all think I'm going to say next? If you guess, let me know in the comments down below, right? We have consistency problem here. We have a very big, like, an enormous consistency problem right here. Now, for me, it is not as big of a deal as it is for those who hold the Bible as infallible, as though it cannot be wrong. Because what just happened right there is, in those days, there was no kingdom in Israel. Okay, that's true. They had the judges, and that was individual heroes that rised up to temporarily break the shackles off. But everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's not true. Israel has been commanded from the time they left Egypt, right? When they got to Mount Sinai and they were given the law, from that point forward, they are told explicitly how to worship. That only this one select group has the knowledge, and only in this one select place are you allowed to do it. And you are never allowed a graven image of any kind. Any form of idolatry is forbidden. And so, this is a problem. This is a consistency error, because it is not true that everyone did what was right in his own eyes and that they had the law. Now, it doesn't matter to me, right? Because the law is fundamentally broken. We talked about that extensively. And there are good parts and there are bad parts, and it's a use of discernment to take them apart, to figure out what's good and what's not. And I can't necessarily tell you. The law is written on your heart as much as it is mine. I know what's right and wrong. I know what I will and won't do. It's not up to me to tell you that. I am not a Levite. I am not trying to write a law. I am not trying to be a prophet. I am only telling you to find God and see what he tells you to do. But this man Micah had a shrine with an idol, and he made an ephod with some household idols and ordained one of his sons as his priest. And it's supposed to be okay in this one instance. We're supposed to forget that the law is established. We are supposed to forget that the Levites are the only ones that can do anything for a minute. And then it's supposed to be that he didn't know because everyone did what they were supposed to do. And that is not consistent. You can be okay with that. You can apologize with that. I will not. Consistency is an important thing when you're trying to prove infallibility, right? that it is infallible, that there is no fallacy found within it. Well, that is a fallacy. That is a problem. That is a direct contradiction to the things that we are taught. Who is that? Oh, crap. Let me turn that on silent real quick. Sorry. Oh. And so, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. We've hammered that enough. Now let's talk about this next part. And there was a young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, who had been residing within the clan of Judah. And this man left the city of Bethlehem in Judah to settle where he could find a place. And as he traveled, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. Where are you from? Micah asked him. I am a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I am on my way to settle where I can find a place. Stay with me, Micah said to him, and be my father and priest, and I will give you 10 shekels of silver per year, a suit of clothes, and your provisions. And so the Levite went in and agreed to stay with him, and the young man became like a son to Micah. Micah ordained the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in his house. And then Micah said, Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, because a Levite has become my priest. Is that right? Is that right? Now, it was written that a Levite can leave. Right? A Levite can leave where he was at, and he can go in earnest to the most holy place and give himself in service there. That is provided for. We have not seen in writing a provision for a wandering itinerant priest, but it's whatever. But we have seen explicitly written what the provisions are for the priests, what they are to be provided. Right? Just throw that aside. We ain't even going to look at that. But the Levites, however, are ordained as God's representative. They are from birth groomed to be the priestly class of Israel. They are doing God's will as expressly given to them through Moses and Aaron, the father of Levi. And so that's a problem, because Micah has an idol in his house. That's a problem. What would Caleb do if he came to Micah's house and he walked into the house of this Israelite and there was an idol sitting there? I can tell you what Caleb would do. There'd be another plague. And so it is again a consistency problem, because this is a Levite. This isn't an ordinary layman. This isn't some random stranger wandering in. This isn't your son that you ordained. This is a Levite. The people of the people set aside, who is set aside even more. Right? The priestly class for whom provision is always provided by God. And that's who is just going to randomly accept that there's an idol in this house. Okay. And in those days there was no king in Israel, and the tribe of the Danites was looking for territory to occupy. Really? Here we are again. They have been given land, told expressly where to go and what to take and when to take it, and they already have, right? They've already been given their land. They've already divided their land. They already know where to go. And so, for up to that time, they had not come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. So the Danites set out 5 men from their clans, men of valor, from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and explore it, because that has always worked so well for them, they told them. And the men entered the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah, where they spent the night. And while they were near Micah's house, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. And so they went over and asked him, Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? Why are you here? Micah has done this and that for me, he said, and he has hired me to be his priest. Then they said to him, Please inquire of God to determine whether we will have a successful journey. And the priest told them, Go in peace. The Lord is watching over your journey. And so the 5 men departed and came to Laish, where they saw that the people were living securely, like the Sidonians, tranquil and unsuspecting. And there was nothing lacking in the land, and no oppressive ruler. And they were far away from the Sidonians, and had no alliance with anyone. And when the men returned to Zorah and Eshtaol, the brothers asked him, What did you find? They answered, Come on, let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and it is very good. Why would you fail to act? Do not hesitate to go there and take possession of the land. And when you enter, you will come to an unsuspecting people and a spacious land, for God has delivered it into your hand. It is a place where nothing on earth is lacking. And so 600 Danites departed from Zorah and Eshtaol, armed with weapons of war. And they went up and camped at Kiriath-jearim in Judah. That is why the place west of Kiriath-jearim is called Mahanath Dan to this day. And from there they traveled to the hill country of Ephraim and came to Micah's house. And then the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land of Laish said to their brothers, Did you know that one of these houses has an ephod, household gods, a graven image, and a molten idol? Now, think about what you should do. So, what happened here? Dan sent his spies out, right? And the 5 men go and they go to Micah's house, and they go into Micah's house where they're invited in. And they receive a blessing from the priest of God, who apparently, despite having a graven image and molten idol, and an ephod and household gods, all of these things, despite that, he gets a message from God that they're going to be okay. And so they go. And they're okay. They go and they spy out the land, and they're like, man, all of these people are living in peace. I bet they don't even have any weapons. And they don't have any alliances with anybody. Well, this land is our land. This land is our land. This land was your land. We're gonna take it with all our swords. And so then, after their successful scouting trip, after they have stayed in this man's house, and they go out and they spy this land that they can take, they go back home and they're like, hey, yeah, this place is over here, but you know what? There's this other spot, and they got this god over there. Let's go check that out. So the people who had given them rest, they're going to go pay a visit to. Let's see what happens. And so they turned aside there and went to the home of the young Levite, the house of Micah, and greeted him. And the 600 Danites stood at the entrance of the gate, armed with their weapons of war. And the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land went inside and took the graven image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molten idol. And when the priest stood at the entrance of the gate with the 600 armed men, and when they entered to Micah's house and took the graven image, the ephod and the household idols and the molten idol, the priest said to them, What are you doing? Be quiet, they said. Put your hand over your mouth and come with us and be a father and priest to us. Is it better for you to be a priest for the house of one person, or a priest for a tribe and family in Israel? And so the priest was glad and took the ephod, the household idols, and the graven image, and went with the people, putting their small children, their livestock, and their possessions in front of them. They turned and departed. After they were some distance from Micah's house, the men in the houses near Micah's house mobilized and overtook the Danites. And when they called out after them, the Danites turned to face them and said to Micah, What is the matter with you that you have called out such a company? And he replied, You took the gods I had made and my priest and went away. What else do I have? How can you say to me, What's the matter with you? And the Danites said, Don't raise your voice against us, or angry men will attack you, and your family will lose your lives. So the Danites went on their way, and Micah turned to go back home because he saw that they were too strong for him. And after they had taken Micah's idols and priests, they went to Laish, to a tranquil and unsuspecting people. And they struck them with their swords and burned down the city. And there was no one to deliver them, because the city was far from Sidon, and had no alliance with anyone. It was in a valley near Beth Rehob. And the Danites rebuilt the city there, and they named it after Dan, or named it Dan, after their forefather Dan, who was born to Israel, though the city was formerly named Laish. And the Danites set up idols for themselves, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. And so they set up for themselves Micah's graven image, and it was there the whole time the house of God was in Shiloh. I'm going to let y'all rest on that 1 second while I let the cat out. Come on, man. Go ahead. All right, so what did we just learn there? That the tribe of Dan, the representative of God, right? They go and 600 men go to a household and they steal from the household of a man who had given them rest, a priest who had blessed them. And they told the priest, you better come with us. Right? They were fixing to kill him. His life was in danger. And so he's like, all right. And he goes and he takes the idols and the graven images and they go out. And they are successful in their endeavors. They go out and take the land. They are blessed by God. And people will make apologies by saying, well, these were not blessed. If they weren't blessed, then how come they got to live in their land? Right? And they set up idols for themselves. And Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, some Hebrews said, and the son of Manasseh. So this says the son of Moses. The other possibility is the son of Manasseh. And the sons and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the day of their captivity of the land. But it's okay because people just did what they wanted before there was kings. In the days of the judges, they didn't have the law yet. Are you kidding me? Now, in those days when there was no king in Israel, a Levite who lived in the remote hill country of Ephraim took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But she was unfaithful to him and left him to return to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah. And after she had been there 4 months, her husband got up and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back, taking his servant and a pair of donkeys. And so the girl brought him into her father's house, and when her father saw him, he gladly welcomed him. His father-in-law, the girl's father, persuaded him to stay. So he remained with him 3 days, eating, drinking, and lodging there. And on the 4th day they got up in the morning and prepared to depart. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, refresh your heart with a morsel of bread, and then you can go. So they sat down, and the two of them ate and drank together. And then the girl's father said to the man, please agree to stay overnight, and let your heart be merry. And the man got up to depart, but his father-in-law persuaded him, so he stayed there that night. And on the 5th day he got up early in the morning to depart, but the girl's father said, please refresh your heart. So they waited until late afternoon, and the two of them ate. And when the man got up to depart with his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, look, the day is coming to a close. Please spend the night. See, the day is almost over. Spend the night here, that your heart may be merry, and then you can get up early tomorrow for your journey. But the man was unwilling to spend the night, and he got up and departed, and arrived opposite Jebus, that is, Jerusalem, with his 2 saddled donkeys and his concubine. And when they were near Jebus, and the day was almost gone, the servant said to his master, please, let us stop at this Jebusite city and spend the night here. But his master replied, we will not turn aside to the city of foreigners, where there are no Israelites. We will go on to Gibeah. He continued, Come, let us try to reach one of these towns to spend the night in Gibeah or Ramah. And so they continued on their journey, and the sun set as they neared Gibeah in Benjamin. And they stopped to go in and lodge at Gibeah. And the Levite went in and sat down in the city square, but no one would take them into his home for the night. That evening, an old man from the hill country of Ephraim, who was residing in Gibeah, the men of that place were Benjamites, came in from his work in the field. And when he looked up and saw the traveler in the city square, the old man asked, "Where are you going, and where have you come from?" And the Levite replied, "We are traveling from Bethlehem to Judah in the remote hill country of Ephraim, where I am from. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and now I am going to the house of the Lord. But no one has taken me into his home, even though there is both straw and feed for our donkeys, and bread and wine for me and the maidservant and young man with me. There is nothing that we, your servants, lack." Hold on. That's what I thought. So here, that's his concubine, which is his wife, because it is his father-in-law's daughter, right? They call it concubine. That means wife, apparently. I always thought it was more of a servant type situation, and maybe it is, because we look down here and he calls it, what's he say? It's his maidservant. Now, we've heard that before. We've heard somebody passing off, well, it was his sister he's passing his wife off as, right? "And peace to you," said the old man. "Let me supply you everything you need. Do not spend the night in the square." And so he brought him to his house and fed his donkeys, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. And while they were enjoying themselves, suddenly the wicked men of the city surrounded the house. Pounding on the door, they said to the old man who owned the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have relations with him." And the owner of the house went out and said to them, "No, my brothers, do not do this wicked thing. After all, this man is a guest in my house. Do not commit this outrage. Look, let me bring out my virgin daughter and the man's concubine, and you can use them and do with them as you wish. But do not do such a vile thing to this man." But the men would not listen to him, so the Levite took his concubine and sent her outside to them. And they raped her and abused her throughout the night, and at dawn they let her go. Early that morning the woman went back to the house where her master was staying, and collapsed at the doorway, and lay there until it was light. And in the morning, when her master got up and opened the doors of the house to go out on his journey, there was his concubine, collapsed in the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold. "Get up," he told her, "let us go." But there was no response, so the man put her on his donkey and set out for home. And when he reached his house, he picked up a knife and took hold of his concubine and cut her, limb by limb, into 12 pieces, and sent her throughout the territory of Israel. And everyone who saw it said, "Nothing like this has been seen or done from the day the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt until this day. Think it over, take counsel, and speak up." We've seen a lot of things in this Bible study, right? We've seen some pretty terrible things in this Bible study. This is one of the worst, because this priest, right, he is a Levite, so he is of the priestly class, the people expressly set apart to know the law intimately, is traveling not in the land of the foreigner. He would have been all right if he'd have went to the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem. That was not Israeli territory at this time, apparently. He'd have been all right if he went there, but no. He went to a place of the tribe of Benjamin, which is like encapsulated inside of Judea. It is the special place, right? They are forever held in a special place because they were the youngest son. They were the only true full brother of Israel. And so this is the place where they decided that Sodom and Gomorrah would be okay to repeat. Because the problem in Sodom and Gomorrah, as we talked about before, is not homosexuality. Big shocker to people, but it's true. It was not. It was the forcing of the things that was the problem. That was the problem in Sodom and Gomorrah, and apparently that is the problem here as well. Like the exact same problem that brought down sulfur and fire and the wrath of God. And only Lot and his family barely escaped by the intervention of an angel. That's what these people are doing, the exact same thing. It's not that they were having homosexual relations, even though that is outlawed in the mundanities, right? Even though it's not that, because that's not uncommon. Apparently, it is a thing that they do to people. Maybe that's why this guy's like, whoa, you don't want to sleep out here. And so they bring him in. And then again, they don't want the women. They're not trying to get with his virgin daughter or the man's concubine. But what do? Like, these brave, bold men, like, these people are so valorous, right? So what does he do when threatened, right? These people are pounding on the door. Boom, 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 right? And now, I would like to think that I'm going to die that day. That's what I want to think. I want to think that I'm going down in a blaze of glory. That's what I want. Because there is no way in hell, there is no possibility ever where my wife is going out of that door instead of me. There is no possibility of that. They may come in that door and take me down, and there's nothing I can do past that point. But there is no way on God's green earth that I am sending my wife out of that door. Or any other woman. Period, the end. I'm going to go out there and we going to see how many people got to die before I do. That's what we going to do. We going to see exactly how much strength my God's going to give me. And I'm going to test the limits. But I am not sending narrow woman outside that door. Period, the end. It's not going to happen. You will tear the whole house down around me first. It is not going to happen. But this is a representative of God. This is a priest of God Almighty. And what does he do? Does he call down the wrath of God as he has been trained to do his entire life? Does he utter a prayer for deliverance? Does he do anything productive? No. He throws his wife out the door to a crowd of men to save himself. And the next morning, he's just going to continue on his way. And then he finds out, well, she's here. Well, I'll be damned. Well, get up. What are you doing? Get off the ground. Jesus, it wasn't that bad. And so he just picks her up and he puts her on a donkey and he carries her off and he chops her into pieces. And sends the pieces. He can't write a letter. Right? We can't send a messenger. We can't tell somebody the story. I'm going to cut the woman I love into pieces and send her to various geographic locations because apparently that's what needs to happen. And everybody's like, oh my God, I had no idea. You have the law. If you have the Levites, you have the law. So, consistency. It's a problem. And then all the Israelites from Dan to Beersheba came to the land of Gilead, came from the land of Gilead, and from the land of Gilead came out. And the congregation assembled as one man before the Lord at Mizpah. And the leaders of all the people in all the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of God's people, 400,000 men on foot, armed with swords. Meanwhile, the Benjamites heard that the Israelites had gone to Mizpah, and the Israelites asked, tell us, how did this wicked thing happen? And so the The husband of the murdered woman answered, I and my concubine came to Gibeah in Benjamin to spend the night. And during the night the men of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house. And they intended to kill me, but they abused my concubine, and she died. And then I took my concubine and cut her into pieces and sent her throughout the land of Israel's inheritance, because they had committed a lewd and disgraceful act in Israel. And behold, all you Israelites, give your advice and verdict here and now. And then all of the people stood as one man and said, not one of us will return to his tent or to his house. Now, this is what we will do in Gibeah. We will go against it as the lot dictates. We will take 10 men out of every 100 from the tribes of Israel, and 100 out of every 1,000, and 1,000 out of every 10,000, to supply provisions for the army when they go to Gibeah in Benjamin, and push them for the atrocity they have committed in Israel. And so all of the men of Israel gathered as one man, united against the city. And the tribes of Israel sent men throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what is this wickedness that has occurred among you? Hand over the wicked men of Gibeah so that we can put them to death and purge Israel of this evil. But the Benjamites refused to heed the voice of their fellow Israelites. And from their cities they came together at Gibeah to go out and fight against the Israelites. And on that day the Benjamites mobilized 26,000 swordsmen from their cities, in addition to the 700 select men of Gibeah. Among all these soldiers, there were 700 select left-handers, each of whom could sling a stone at a hair without missing. And the Israelites, apart from Benjamin, mobilized 400,000 swordsmen, each one an experienced warrior. Y'all know what just happened? Do y'all know what just happened? If you know what just happened, let me know in the comments down below. But what just happened was the first recorded false flag in the history of ever. Like, what just happened was that Israel was just goaded into war against Benjamin. Now, it is entirely possible that the situation happened as it was unfolded, right? That this man, in his cowardice, threw his wife out and then recovered her body and chopped it into pieces and sent it all over the place. But do you remember how this story started? Do you remember what happened in the beginning? Let's look at it. A Levite who lived in a remote hill country of Ephraim took himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And she was unfaithful and left him to return to her father's house. And then, after 4 months, her husband gets up and goes after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. But the father wasn't having that. The father's like, something ain't right. Something is wrong in this situation. And so he's like, no, stay here and chill. And he's like, no, stay the night. And he's like, no, just eat. No. And then finally this Levite's like, no, we're leaving. I don't care if it's getting late, we're leaving. And so they leave. And then they, on the 5th day, gets up and they go and they find this place and they don't have anywhere to stay the night. Well, it's farther down. So they sit in the city square and no one would take them into his home now. No one would take them into their home. But if these men had ill intent in the way that we are told that they did, why? Why would not one of them, instead of letting the one person in town who didn't actually live in town, but came from outside of town, instead of having that person just coincidentally be the person to take him in because nobody else would, why not invite him into your house? That's worked for Israel several times before. Just invite him into your house. And then when they're asleep, do what you want. You've got control of the door then. But if you were trying to foment a civil war, this would be a good way to get it done, right? If you could convince all of Israel that you killing your wife and chopping her into pieces and sending her off was a reason to go to war because of the repeating of Gomorrah or Sodom, then that might be something, huh? And so they go to war. They roll out. Here's the Patriot Act, .001, like the original. The Israelites set up, went out to Bethel, and inquired of God, who of us shall go up first to fight against the Benjamites? Judah will be first, the Lord replied. And the next morning, the Israelites set out and camped near Gibeah. And the men of Israel went out to fight against Benjamin and took up their battle positions at Gibeah. And the Benjamites came out of Gibeah and cut down 22,000 Israelites on the battlefield that day. But the Israelite army took courage and again took their battle positions in the same place where they had raised themselves on the first day. And they went up and wept before the Lord until evening, inquiring him, should we draw near for battle against our brothers, the Benjamites? And the Lord said, go up against them. And on the second day, the Israelites advanced against the Benjamites. And on that same day, the Benjamites came out against them from Gibeah and cut down another 18,000 Israelites, all of them armed with swords. And then the Israelites, all the people, went up to Bethel, where they sat weeping before the Lord. And that day they fasted until evening and presented burnt offerings and peace offerings to the Lord. And the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days the ark of the covenant of the God was there, and Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, served before it. And the Israelites asked, should we again go out to battle against our brothers, the Benjamites, or should we stop? And the Lord answered, fight, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hands. And so Israel set up an ambush around Gibeah. On the third day, the Israelites went up against the Benjamites and arrayed themselves against Gibeah as they had done before. And the Benjamites came out against them and were drawn away from the city. And they began to attack the people as before, killing about 30 men of Israel in the fields and on the roads, one of which led up to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. We are defeating them as before, said the Benjamites. But the Israelites said, let us retreat and draw them away from the city onto the roads. And so all the men of Israel got up from their places and arrayed themselves at Baal Tamar. And the Israelites in ambush charged their positions west of Gibeah. Then 10,000 select men from all Israel made a frontal assault against Gibeah. The battle was fierce, but the Benjamites did not realize the disaster was upon them. The Lord defeated Benjamin in the presence of Israel, and on that day the Israelites slaughtered 25,100 Benjamites, all armed with swords. And then the Benjamites realized they had been defeated. Now, the men of Israel had retreated before Benjamin because they were relying on the ambush they had sent against Gibeah. And the men in ambush rushed suddenly against Gibeah, and they advanced and put the whole city to the sword. And the men of Israel had arranged a signal with the men in ambush. When they sent up a great cloud of smoke from the city, the men of Israel would turn in battle. And when the Benjamites had begun to strike them down, killing about 30 men of Israel, they said, they are defeated before us as in the first battle. And when the column of smoke began to go up from the city, the Benjamites looked behind them and saw the whole city going up in smoke. And then the men of Israel turned back on them, and the men of Benjamin were terrified, and when they realized the disaster had come upon them. And so they fled before the men of Israel toward the wilderness, but the battle overtook them, and the men coming out of the city struck them down there. They surrounded the Benjamites, pursued them, and easily overtook them in the vicinity of Gibeah on the east. And 18,000 Benjamites fell, all men of valor. And then the Benjamites turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. And Israel cut down 5,000 men on the roads. And they overtook them at Gedon and struck down 2,000 more. That day 25,000 Benjamite swordmen fell, all men of valor. But 600 men turned and fled into the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed 4 months. And the men of Israel turned back against the other Benjamites and put the sword to all the cities, including the animals and everything else they found. And they burned down all the cities in their path. And that was to a tribe of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin. Now, the men of Israel had sworn an oath at Mizpah, saying, "Not one of us will give his daughter in marriage to a Benjamite." And so the people came to Bethel and sat before God until evening, lifting up their voices and weeping bitterly. "Why, O Lord, God of Israel," they cried out, "what has happened in Israel? Today, in Israel, one tribe is missing." The next day, the people got up early, built an altar there, and presented burnt offerings and peace offerings. And the Israelites asked, "Who among all the tribes of Israel did not come to the assembly before the Lord?" For they had taken a solemn oath that anyone who failed to come up before the Lord at Mizpah would surely be put to death. And the Israelites grieved for their brothers, the Benjamites, and said, "Today a tribe is cut off from Israel. What should we do about wives for the survivors, since we have sworn by the Lord not to give them our daughters in marriage?" And so they asked, "Which one of the tribes of Israel failed to come up before the Lord at Mizpah?" And in fact, no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp for the assembly. For when the people were counted, none of the residents of Jabesh Gilead were there. And so the congregation sent 12,000 of their most valiant men and commanded them, "Go and put to the sword those living in Jabesh Gilead, including the women and children. And this is what you are to do. Devote to destruction every male as well as every female who has had relations with a man." And so they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young women who had not had relations with a man, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh in the land of Canaan. And then the whole congregation sent a message of peace to the Benjamites who were at the rock of Rimmon. And at that time the Benjamites returned and were given women who were spared from Jabesh Gilead. But there were not enough women for all of them. And the people grieved for Benjamin because the Lord had made a void in the tribes of Israel. And then the elders of the congregation said, What should we do about the wives for those who remain, since the women of Benjamin have been destroyed?" And they added, "They must be heirs for the survivors of Benjamin, so that a tribe of Israel will not be wiped out. But we cannot give them our daughters as wives. For Israel had sworn, 'Cursed is he who gives a wife to a Benjamite.' But look," they said, "there is a yearly feast to the Lord in Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, east of the road that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and south of Lamona." So they commanded the Benjamites, "Go, hide in the vineyards and watch. And when you see the daughters of Shiloh come out to perform their dances, each of you is to come out of the vineyards and catch for himself a wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And when their fathers or brothers come to us to complain, we will tell them, 'Do us a favor by helping them, since we did not get wives for each of them in the war. Since you did not actually give them your daughters, you have no guilt.' And the Benjamites did as instructed, and carried away the number of women they needed from the dancers they caught. They went back to their own inheritance and rebuilt their cities and settled in them. And at that time each of the Israelites returned from there to his own tribe and clan, and each to his own inheritance. And in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes." There's an awful lot left, right? There's an awful lot left to talk about. How many people were just sacrificed? How many people were just goaded into war and died, right? So we had, on the first day, Benjamites mobilized 26,000 swordsmen and 700 select men, right? The Israelites mobilized 400,000 swordsmen, each one an experienced warrior. Now, don't get me wrong. There are tactics and there are tactics, but if I've got 400,000 experienced swordsmen and I'm going up against a little bit less than 27,000, I'm going to win that. Especially if all 400,000 are an experienced warrior. So That's an irrational fight. The Benjamites had to have been very, very convinced of what their justification was, right? Like, but what had happened was they had just been lied on as a people. Like these tribes in this one little area, because Benjamin's a small tribe, right? It is not. It is not Judea. Judea is huge, or Judah. Judah is huge. Manasseh is huge. Ephraim's pretty big. Dan is a little small. And so there's not a lot of them. They have the land right outside of Hebron. We've talked an awful lot about Hebron and the blood sacrifices of the entities. And the first day, the Benjamins come out, and their force of just under 27,000 goes up and fights and cuts down 22,000. And we don't get the casualties from the Benjamites. I'm going to assume that there were some, but if you have 22,000 dead, that's a significant number. That's a lot of blood on the ground. And then the next day, and it's important to note that God told them to go, right? According to the Judah will be first. Judah is who is to go. But Judah controls the other part of Hebron. And so Judah goes, and 22,000 souls are spilled on the ground that day in this land. And then the next day, the Israelites go out again, and they lose 18,000 more. Both times having been told by God to go out and do it. Now, the entire force they're going up against is under 27,000, and they have already lost many more than that. They almost lost that many the first day. Another 5,000, and they had been there. So, this is a lot of people. This is a lot of death to fuel what happens next. And what happens next? Well, I'll be damned. They set up an ambush. That works for Israel a lot. They don't win on the battlefield. They win through ambush. And what happens again is the same thing that happened in Ai. Like we just saw a repeat of Sodom and Gomorrah. And now we're seeing a repeat of Ai. Because what has happened is they act like they're getting beat again. And they retreat. And the people come out of the city. And then they rush in and they take over the city. And they set it on fire again. I wonder if they had torches under a bucket. Under a pottery. I wonder. Because it would fit. And they set up a great cloud of smoke real quick. And there's a lot of people. A lot of people can start fires really quickly. But we have evidence of them being able to start fires really quickly. Right? And so, there's a lot of sacrifice that happens right here. And then the next day, we lose 18,000 Benjamites. And then 5,000 more. So that's 23, and then 2,000 more. So that's 25,000. That day, 25,000 Benjamin. 600 fled to the wilderness. And then we get into the other part, right? Why was Benjamin not allowed to have wives from any of the other tribes? Was this such a problem already that it was something? Like, Benjamin was guaranteed protection by Judah in the blessing, right? And so it's really strange that this tribe of Israel, who had the law, that cannot be hammered hard enough. This whole, well, people just did what they wanted, that's bullshit. They had the law. If they were Levites, there was the law. And so they knew the right thing to do. They were dwelling in the land doing the wrong thing. And nobody called them to task until this one guy who had a dispute with his wife who was unfaithful, and then on the trip home she dies. Sends you body parts through the postage, and it's enough to provoke you to war now. It wasn't enough to provoke you to war that they were assaulting strangers in the exact same manner as Sodom and Gomorrah, which was a story They knew that story. It doesn't make sense, but let's just throw away that one of the tribes is not allowed to intermarry with the rest of the tribes. We're just going to throw that away. We're not even going to ask the why and just assume it was sin related. But how do they get wives for these men? Because apparently they've got to do that because they killed all of the wives and children. Everybody's dead in this tribe but these 600 people. And so they're like, okay, who didn't show up to muster? And it's like, well, we had an UA. These people had an unauthorized absence. They didn't show up. All right, we'll go and kill them. And kill every one of them who has not, or who has had sex, basically. And so they go and they kill all the men and the boys, and they kill all the women, and they take the girls. And these are girls who are not old enough to have had sexual relations, because I don't know if you're aware of it, but if you've been following along, you should be. As soon as you could bleed, you could breed. And so they would marry them off as soon as possible. That was both a commodity that they had to pay for the care of, and they would receive benefits from getting rid of. Like the dowry would come in, and they would get all kinds of goats and shit. So, like, that was the goal for having a daughter, was to marry her off as fast as you could, but you couldn't until she had menstruated. It wasn't seemly, right? It wasn't until Muhammad comes along and they justified that later, right? And so, but here we have an instance of the exact same problem. Because they went and took the girls who were too young, and they gave them to these men who had just fought these battles. And they were like, here, we're going to make peace. We're going to kill off this whole town and take their daughters and give them to you. But you know what? There's not enough. And we only had the one tribe that was UA. Like, we only had the one tribe not show up for muster. So what we're going to do is we're going to let you go to our neighbors over here, and they have this ceremony where they send their daughters out for some reason into the wild for a little bit, because, you know, why not? And this is something that they do every year. And so we know when it's going to happen. And what we're going to do is we're going to let you go and kidnap 200 of their kids. And then when they show up and they're mad because you did that, we're going to be like, hey, bruh, it's all good. It's all good. Just do us this little solid real quick. But, I mean, if you don't, we'll just stick this thing in your ear. But you can do us this solid. You can turn around and go home. And then we don't have to kill you. But forget about your children. Don't worry about them. We got that. We gave them to these men that were doing some pretty wild things. That's what we did. We gave it to them. So, what you gonna do? That's the people of God for you. I know I hold some unconventional beliefs. We have seen some wild things. This wrapping up of Judges is pretty damn wild. I know I step on a lot of toes. It is not intentional, but I am compelled. God has literally told me to do this. He has made it abundantly clear to me that my focus and my role is what I am doing here. It is to expand knowledge for people, absolutely. And it is to expand knowledge of God to people, absolutely. God loves you. God does not require bloodshed. The only sacrifice that God has ever required from you was your sin. Was for you to put down your sin and turn to Him. That has been the whole, like the sum of it all. Yes, we have a sin nature. Yes, we want to sin. Yes, we do sometimes need consequences. That's why we were given the law. Not because it was required for you to kill a goat to get to heaven. That was never a thing. It was never a valid thing to commit sacrifice to get to heaven. It was never a valid thing. And so with that being a truth, everything else falls apart. Now, there are great, great truths in this book. You can find God in this book. But if you follow this book in the way that it tells you sometimes, it leads you down the wrong path. You are dealing with the wrong entity. If your God is requiring you to sacrifice, you need to seek something. Go in prayer. I'm not telling you that you have to follow what I follow. I'm reading what this says because it is eye-opening to me to see these things. I have read the Bible before, both in whole and in part for my entire life. And I am finding new things since I have submitted to the will of God. There is but one God. He created all things. He wants you to serve him willingly, freely, without fear of retribution. Because I got a news flash for you. In this time, in this Bible, right now, there was no hell. We've talked about that already. Sheol and hell was not the same. It is not the same concept at all. There is no concept of burning damnation and eternal pain until like 200 or 300 years before Jesus. It's not a thing. And so killing an animal to be saved from hell was not a thing. And so a man dying on a cross to put an end to you killing animals so that you could get to heaven was also not a thing. That does not mean it didn't happen. People still killed goats. I believe that Jesus got on the cross voluntarily as a human because he saw an opportunity to put an end to all of this stuff that we're reading. Like, he knew these things. This was his stories. They didn't have a television. There was no internet. They told these stories. How terrible is that? This is the foundation. Now, it brought them up from the peoples around them. The people around them were even worse than the things that we see here. Right? This was setting them apart. It is important to note that God is real. He absolutely loves you and wants you to repent. But he does not require any blood at all for your repentance. All you have ever had to do was say something like this: Dear Heavenly Father, I come to you as a sinner and I ask you to forgive my sins. I freely accept the grace that you freely extend to me, and I ask you to change my life to yours. And if you say anything even resembling that, you're done. No bodily fluids, no washed in the water or the blood. Your willingness to serve and giving up the sin is the only sacrifice. It is not a heavy yoke. It does not follow all of this mundanities, all of this minutia that they throw in there. When you can't walk 5 miles on a Sunday. No, none of that matters. Service to God and the law written on your heart is what matters. There is but one God. Love him with all of your heart, soul, and mind. And love your neighbor as yourself, because they are you. You and your neighbor and me and you, we're all the same. We are all divine expressions of God. Every single one of us. Every single one of us is worthy of respect, love, honor, all of the good things in life. God wants all of that for you. He does not want this violence. He does not. And that's where I'm going to wrap it up. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion. To the end of Judges, we are done with Judges. Thank you, Lord. And we'll be getting into some more rather difficult stuff as we go along. But finally, we're done with this, because this was a particularly rough period in history. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. God loves you. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.